Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 9th episode of the Magnum Opi podcast. This episode, and for the next 2 episodes, hopefully we can cover it all in that time, we're going to be looking very in depth at The Iron Heel by Jack London. Different the slides and the conversation of the books. We're actually going to just be taking a look at the text directly, skipping through any descriptive and focusing mainly on the conversations had by the protagonists and the straw men that we find within. So with me, I've got all regulars. I've got Brandig.
Good morning from Texas.
I have Quackhouse.
Hello.
It's a little bit less cheery. Freelance.
Hi, why are we reading this filth?
Because it's so dreamy.
Yes.
Good evening.
What makes you say that? What could you possibly dislike about the Iron Heel?
Well, I like that it's printed on paper, but I do not like the words in it. Let's say that. I think it's communist fan fiction.
Yes. If Tumblr existed in 1910, I think that this is where you'd find it.
It is extremely didactic.
Yeah, it's purely rhetoric as well. 90% of the conversation had within, which is obviously the great irony, is that most of the criticisms labelled against his opponents, he just accuses them of rhetoric and then goes on to provide nothing but more rhetoric. So it's all.
He does like on occasion bring up statistics, etc., and so on and so forth, but nothing in any specific detail.
Once in a while, some scientific opinion.
So who wants to give a description of the plot, if they can stomach it?
Okay, so you have some kind of Star Trek-like future where they discovered this document. And it's written by Avis Everhart about Ernest Everhart. And so basically it's somebody reading and commenting on a document they found, and this document describes the first and second American Socialist Revolution.
Yeah. It has kind of an interesting structural kind of technique, just in that we have this found manuscript which has been heavily glossed by a future editor, and these glosses reveal what kind of future we're supposed to be, heading towards, and they kind of position us as inhabitants of that future and people who were constantly being asked to marvel at the kind of primitive thinking of our ancestors.
It's very similar to perspective on the preserves in Brave New World. So it's like, this is how we got where we are, and this is what things were like so many years ago. Look upon it and learn and recognize how much better off we are right now. That's carried throughout the novel in the form of footnotes rather than additions to the actual text.
Yeah, so most people will probably be familiar with Footnotes. It's most similar to 1984. It's used a lot more frequently in The Iron Heel for world building, but in 1984 you do have the occasional footnote hinting at it being a text within the universe of the text.
There's some oddly basic stuff in the footnotes as well, some of the words and stuff. I don't know. Just see it all.
Yeah, well,
they might be new in the beginning of the 20th century,
I guess.
Well, some of them are very odd, and I'm just put in there to, I assume, just try to add to the validity and the authenticity of the document, because one point in particular stands out to me, where Ernest mentions a date and there's a footnote correcting the date, but obviously the author has made the character have a mistake on the date to then put the footnote in to correct it. It's a little bit strange, and I don't really think it adds any anything to the book. I don't know why. It really stuck in my mind as something quite annoying.
I think some of them are there to imply that that they're no longer the case. It's the guy being read in the future. The footnotes implying that the thing that it's posted the note is no longer applicable. Or,
well, it's
no
also
longer used.
It's also an opportunity for the author to establish the bona fides of the reviewer, and that the manuscript itself was written by fallible humans and those people who are actually capable of making mistakes. So it's a little bit of an unreliable narrator in that it reminds the reader that the narrator is actually human rather than an omniscient being who is fully aware of everything. It's a subtle reminder of that, and I actually like it for that.
We should say the narrator is the wife of the main character, and the story sort of detailed how she fell in love with him, and I think it's meant to guide the reader to fall in love with his ideas, because we have her being sort of bowled over by his ideas and swooning over him and his ideas. And I think we're meant to do the same thing. We're supposed to fall passionately in love with his ideas.
Yeah, I think that's why it's put in there. And I just want to ask people, why do you think that it works so well? It's a dystopian novel. And why do you think that when you take something like Brave New World that we looked at, or Animal Farm 1984, why do you think that the dystopian world building in those works so well, but in this it just feels like communist fan fiction? What do you think it is that, or at least it feels like that way to me, and I think most of the panel agrees. What is it you think differentiates the text from other dystopian novels that we've looked at that makes it feel of lesser quality?
There's a smugness, because I think in the glosses, right, the period of oligarchy is over, and now something kind of ideal has been achieved in their view, right? There's a kind of smugness to it, which I would compare to William Morris's News from Nowhere, the utopian novel that it's quite similar in many ways, and there's this sort of constant kind of smug and sort of almost like incredulous accounts of how people used to think, like how we used to have private property and how ridiculous, and people would cling to these little piles of money and how stupid and stuff like this, right? There's this, I think part of it is kind of smugness.
Well, one of the other elements that really makes the Iron Heel an inferior entry in the category is the massive straw manning of the opposition that 1984, Animal Farm, Brave New World, etc., don't engage in. They treat the opposition with fairness and recognition of the value and rightness of some of the positions. They steel man their opposition rather than straw man them. So there's a lot of
what I see is that in 1984 in A Brave New World, the actions of the oppositions are actually logical. There's a reason for them. Not a reason that the protagonist wants, but you can understand why they happen. Well, here it's just said, oh yeah, the plutocrats are just plain evil and they're greedy and they're doing it because they're greedy. So or because they're plain evil, and then you just know, like, no, there has to be something more going. People are doing this for a reason, and this makes the straw man very, very weak.
And there's a lot of Mary Sue. That's the word for which I was looking. The main character is very Mary Sue-like. They never get anything wrong. They never get anything wrong. They never get anything incorrect. They're always 100% right. They always see everything coming before anybody else. They're never surprised.
He has no flaws. In the eyes of the narrator, anyway, he has no flaws.
Well, in the text of the book, there are no flaws.
Yeah.
Irrespective of whether there are any flaws in the eyes of the narrator or not.
Yeah, so they try
blinded by her love.
Well, yeah, they try and wave that away in the forward. They say, well, he wasn't quite as strong as she described, but I mean, it is so cringeworthy. I feel some of the parts, like it feels like the most modern text we've read so far because it feels like a self-insert fan fiction. It feels like a teenager wanting to be, the most powerful and most knowledgeable, and they can walk into a room and slap everyone down with their logical arguments. It feels so fedora hat tipping.
Yeah.
It's insufferable.
In his many conversations he has with like groups of people, like he'll just state something, and then the people will just back down and go, "Oh yeah, that is right." Yeah.
Or he'll make them so angry with his superior logic that they can't even come back with an argument because they're just so stunned that someone could come up with such an effective argument.
And actually that argument that you're making, that this feels like a very modern novel because it's so very Tumblr-ish, actually kind of proves that the premise of the novel is actually wrong, that people will improve to the point that they will overcome all this greed and form the brotherhood of men, while what you actually see is that nothing actually has changed in 100 years.
I think you could go to a lot of kind of socialist wannabe leftist types and if you got them to talk about capitalism, they would try and paint the same picture and try and push the same level of nefarious.
Justine, you were going to say something?
I've forgotten what it was. Sorry. Come to me in a sec.
Yeah. The general leftist / socialist / Marxist interpretation of the course of the natural, eventual, inevitable course of history is the revolution of the proletariat and the triumph of the people over the bourgeoisie. So it's just taken as a matter of course that eventually it's going to happen, whether or not there's any logical path that leads from here to there.
This is what's so frustrating, and this is why I say everything he says is rhetoric, because there's a recognition in several points of human nature, but as soon as the argument no longer needs there to be an understanding of human nature, he'll instantly dismiss it, and it's what we see with the footnotes, because so much of them are. It's so implausible for our modern minds to think that these people had bundles of money and were living in this capitalist system. It's so crazy to think that these people were so selfish and self-interested when that footnote is in a section where the conversation being had is that an innate part of human nature is the selfishness of man. So Ernest recognizes that, but then says, well, the only way that we can stop people being selfish is if we push for a socialist state. Well, you've just argued that it's an innate part of human nature, so
it won't go away.
Yeah, you can't put in a system to push that under the rug.
Which is why they're pushing the same narrative now that they were over 100 years ago in the book.
In her descriptions of him, it's very socialist realism. I keep picturing like the kind of ideal worker with his muscles, bursting out everywhere and looking off into the sunrise, right?
The image Boxer. The image that I put on screen for Boxer, that picture was in my head constantly. That chiseled, semi-Aryan face, looking sternly at the viewer. Saying, I am the ideal prole.
He's compared to a Superman as well, so we get a reference to Nietzsche.
Well, good old Ivan Drago.
The Superman. Yeah.
He dies.
So, we're going to be going through. We've given everyone a basic understanding of what's in the book.
Just to interject real quickly. Dolph Lundgren is actually a bloody Superman.
Yes, he is. Doesn't he have like 7 degrees?
Yeah, he's got like PhDs. The man is brilliant, and he's a beast. He more than Ernest would be a man I would follow.
Dolph Lundgren 2024? Are we saying?
I have to look this guy up. I don't even know who he is.
I think, just bear with me. Someone make conversation because I just need to look something up.
Well,
What's your favorite Rocky?
4, obviously. The whole point with the straw manning and the position of the Iron Heel is the author Jack London, and we haven't spoken a great deal about him, but he was a very itinerant person who had a lot of jobs, and he traveled constantly throughout the world and the new frontier. I think he spent time up in a lot of time up in Alaska.
Yeah,
and he worked.
Yeah,
he worked all over the place in shipping and fishing, all of the frontier related jobs. Timber, that sort of thing.
Leanings?
He was up in the Yukon, I think, as well.
Yes, and his novels are generally very, very good when he sticks to what he knows. I like a lot of his naturalist work. I like a lot of the stuff that he's done about the Yukon and the frontier. But when he talks about political...
You're still going to vote for him now?
What?
He was in a female remake of Fight Club. Sorry, carry on.
That's fine. I'm more than happy to vote for him. The dude's got to eat. It's the same thing with the guy who was in National Treasure.
Oh, Nicolas Cage.
Yeah. There's no film that Nicolas Cage has ever turned down, as far as I'm aware.
I'm sure we could probably chip together and get him on stream.
Yeah, we probably can. What you're saying explains why Jack London has so many fans, I think, because I haven't read his stuff, but I was thinking, well, this isn't very bloody good, but he has so many fans. He's a very popular writer. And it sounds like he has written some good stuff then.
Yes, it's the stuff that when he wrote what he knew, he did it very, very well. And you can even see that in this writing. The quality of his writing is very, very good. It's just the subject matter. He has a poor understanding of it, and his depth of knowledge about political philosophy is superficial at best. So he's only able to ever strawman both sides.
I hope it's not just me not being able to look past the content, but from just reading this and nothing else from him, I don't see him being a good writer in this. It's not just the content. The actual writing style, to me, is not particularly good as well. But it may just be that because of the content, I can't look past that. And hopefully, if I read other writings, I could understand why people appreciate his works. But just from this, I really don't understand the appeal.
What were his politics?
He was a socialist.
Yeah.
He was earnest.
What could they?
Yeah.
There's an interesting place, though. I would encourage people to visit in Oakland, California. A friend of mine took me to it's like a log cabin style bar that Jack London used to frequent, and it's kind of sitting on the bay. And it feels like it's just been dropped in from another era, because all around it is quite modern, but there's this log cabin filled with interesting stuff. So yeah, good place to visit. Let's see if I can find the name of it. But it's sort of like, that's its calling card. It's Jack London's Hangout.
Right. Whilst you look that up, let's go on to the actual text, I suppose. I think that easiest thing to do is for us to take it page by page, and then any topics or any quotes that people want to use as a springboard for further discussion, just bring it up and we'll discuss it. So starting at the forward. as I said, at the very beginning, we get told that they're setting up the framework of the writing style, which is that it's a manuscript that they found 7 centuries after it was written, before the takeover by the Iron Heel and then the eventual destruction of the Iron Heel, which is the global oligarchy. It gets spicy, I suppose, with some of the. I think some of the analysis might be accurate, but like I say, like with a lot of things we've looked at, whether or not you can provide a decent analysis of the situation doesn't mean that the solution that you provide is valid. So, the thing that influenced me to not just do this as we usually do and instead take a look at the text directly is in the forward. There was so much just on the forward alone that I wanted to talk about. So just at the bottom, let me find the exact quote. Yeah, so we see this utopianism coming through just in the very first page of the forward, where it says these are the things that are so hard for us of this enlightened age to understand. Mm-hmm. History tells us that these things were, and biology and psychology tells us why they were, but history and biology and psychology do not make things alive. We accept them as facts, but we are left with sympathetic compassion for them. You know, I think that that's a fair analysis of text.
And it's also a perfect position from which to analyze history in the view of that particular philosophical group. Mm-hmm. What actually is and the nature of things is kind of irrelevant when you take into account how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
Therefore, they have to translate this into feelings before they derive any value from it, which is just wrong on pretty much every level.
Feelings don't care about your facts.
Yeah, in a nutshell. And there's a certain validity to that, in that humans are sufficiently competent and capable creatures that they have a certain ability to ignore reality and substitute their own perceptions for reality. But done on a large enough scale or for a long enough time, reality will eventually reassert itself. I believe it was Ayn Rand who said you can ignore reality, but you cannot ignore the consequences of ignoring reality.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good job you brought up Rand, because we have Freelance currently reading. Is it The Fountainhead that you're on?
Yeah, I'm reading The Fountainhead.
What was it like flitting between the Iron Heel and the Fountainhead?
Right?
It made me look online for shivers. It's while the Iron Heel goes into the virtues of corporatism and socialism, Ayn Rand obviously does exactly the opposite and celebrates individualism. So, but the writing style and the way it's written is also completely different. So people have actual conversations in the Fountainhead instead of.
I bloody hope so, given the size of it.
I think to me, the similarities come across in the description of the sort of the individual, like the protagonist, right? And, and also the love affair between the two, the woman and the man.
That was what I wanted to ask. Who romanticizes the protagonist more?
I think that in The Fountainhead, Howard Rourke is definitely has his faults. Mm-hmm. So he's not the ideal man. Well, he's the ideal man.
Swooning over him.
He's the ideal man for Ayn Rand, but he's very discompassionate. He made me remind me of some kind of villain in Star Trek. While here you have like the most compassionate Superman without any flaws. So Howard Rourke definitely has flaws. He is unable to cooperate with other people because he's so dogmatic in his own vision. And this makes him a better architect, but it does not make him a better human.
Mm-hmm. I was assigned that book in high school, and my mother was so scandalized when I brought it home. My mother is not a Not a Randian, let's put it that way.
Not a fan.
Well, I don't think he's ever read Rand, but Rand is kind of held up as, a villainess by liberals generally.
I would say that this goes to the two writers' knowledge of their depth of knowledge about their subjects, but London romanticizes Ernest much more than Rand romanticizes Rourke. Or sorry, strike that and reverse it.
What?
So Rand romanticizes Rourke much more than London romanticizes Ernest, because Rand has enough depth of knowledge about her subject matter that she can actually create a romantic notion that is attractive of Rourke. That appeals to the. She also had the benefit of being a female, so she knows what she's talking about and what she's attracted. Whereas London not only didn't know a hell of a lot about his subject matter, he also was a man, so he was trying to paint the picture of what he thought was the perfect man.
Yeah, I never realized just how fascinated women are with necks, considering that seems to be his most prominent body part throughout a lot of the descriptions. It's just a constant reference to his boxer neck.
Well,
very odd.
Ryan does the same. She has a description in the Fountainhead of a guy who's described as having no neck. It's basically his chin wraps around. And
Dolph Lundgren, essentially.
Well, no, as in that he's really fat. That he basically has a collar of fat instead of having a slender neck and a chin.
Just an amorphous blob.
Yeah.
So by the way, this place it's in Jack London Square, and it's called the First and Last Chance Saloon. And it's quite Heinold's First and Last.
I still can't believe that they named the whole town after him.
Oh, I can't. He was a prolific writer, and he was. You really need to read some of his period fiction that's not related to political philosophy, because it's actually quite good.
All right, so just following along on the actual text, the bottom passage of this page as well is something that really started to get my mind going. The rise of the oligarchy will always remain a cause of secret wonder to the historian and the philosopher. Other great historical events have their place in social evolution. They were inevitable. Their coming could have been predicted. This sort of historiography just really hooked in my mind that it comes up quite a lot throughout the text, that there is a certainty that we will be progressing through, as he describes it, primitive communism to slavery, through feudalism, and then from feudalism, nothing could have followed but industrial revolution and into capitalism, and then it's inevitable that following on from that will be socialism. This sort of progressive view of history comes up again and again throughout the text, and obviously, it's completely opposed to the way I view history. And
well, that's a core tenet of not only Marxism and socialism, but it's a core tenet of scientism and natural, inevitable march of progress. Yeah. Asimov created an entire pseudoscience about predicting the future. There was Harry Seldon's
psychohistory, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, psychohistory.
Yeah,
and that has been a core component of scientific theory for much of the 19th and 20th centuries, trying to perfect the ability to predict the march of time and society through history.
And it's been hugely influential. So I think most people, like most normies, take some of these tenets for granted, right? At one point in the preface, we have capitalism was adjudged by the sociologists of the time to be the culmination of bourgeois rule, the ripened fruit of the bourgeois revolution. Now he doesn't mention Marx. He mentions Herbert Spencer. I guess this was this view of like this, progress stages, capitalism leading to socialism. That's like basic to Marxism, right? But I guess it was also held by socialists in general.
Yes. Well, I mean, he starts it off from the wrong foot by describing primitive communism. This concept is completely wrong. It's not a thing. It might have been a thing in certain communities, but for the most part, we never had primitive communism.
This is basically the blank slate, right?
Yeah. So the reason it's framed that way is because it's kind of it in some ways is a progressive view of history, but it's slightly secular in the way it's saying we've gone from primitive communism, we'll go through these stages of history that are inevitable, and then when we come out of the other end, we'll be in a non-primitive communism.
I mean, what about tribes or families?
Exactly.
Tribes, but nothing larger scale than that, right?
If they think it's primitive communism, I would happily see someone that is of that opinion go and live in one of those communities and see just how communistic it actually is.
Yeah.
Being kicked out for being lazy.
Yeah, it's. Is there any U.S. senator that you're referring to there? Oh.
No, nothing. Nothing like nothing Vermonty or something like that.
But it's completely untrue. It's always been hierarchical. There are some examples of primitive communism, but for the vast majority, it is a viciously hierarchical system. And again, it says that the feudalism was an inevitable consequence of the breakup of the Roman Empire. Again, it's this sort of fatalist progressive view of history, and historiography is something that I think needs to be spoken about much more, because when you seize the reins of how people view history, it affects how they view the future. And so a progressive notion of history will obviously influence on the whole how people think the future will occur.
If anything follows feudalism, I'd say it was socialism or communism, at least.
Well, I don't see why it's inevitable that feudalism was to, and this is even if you say that it does follow, because you could argue it was not.
Okay, well, it has followed, like.
Yeah, but just because it has, what he's saying is that it's inevitable that it would have. Well, what's the justification for thinking that?
I would say, like in Britain, where we got rid of feudalism and then had capitalism, whereas in Eastern Europe, particularly, they doubled down on feudalism and then progressed into communism.
Suddenly, yeah. Abruptly. It was abrupt, wasn't it? I mean, they certainly stepped into communism, but they went into the the passage into communism from the Russian Revolution, right? So they went straight from feudalism into communism, but I would say it was quite violent and sudden.
Yeah. They were forced into it as opposed to it being a natural progression. And as we take a look at societies throughout time and throughout history, we can always see that there has been a hand on the tiller and someone directing that society, whether they were a king or a lord or a president or a prime minister or a party apparatchik, whatnot, however it is, or a patriarch in a family. There's always been solid direction and hierarchy within human society that is just not recognized or appreciated or understood by the entire concept of communism.
Yeah, I just want. Sorry, carry on.
They always are scandalized by it, by the existence of these leaders.
Yes, yeah, but because a leader, you can't have a leader if you want an actual equal system. but you're always going to get one. So that is why the eternal revolution is the most logical, if not the most damaging. But just to make clear to everyone listening as well, this was published in 1907. So obviously historical context could not be used. Historical examples could not be used as can be at the moment, as nothing had really been put into practice yet.
Further, there's a lot of references to dates after the publication of the work in the footnotes and predictions that turn out to be completely unfounded and false.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the difference between the utopian socialism of Proudhon, people like this in the 19th century, and Marx is that for Proudhon it wasn't necessarily going to be a violent affair, right? That maybe by sort of articulating their vision and they would persuade people this is the best way. But Marx always talked about violent revolution.
Which proves that Marx actually had some inkling of what humans were
reality.
like.
Yeah.
And again, I go to saying that Ernest is just rhetoric, because he will flip between saying, well, I'm not trying to egg on any sort of violence between classes. I don't even mention the term class conflict. And then the next chapter, it'll be, well, obviously it's going to be, we're going to be bathed in rivers of blood before we get what we're aiming for. But, it's just an inevitable consequence. So again,
and it's justified.
Yeah.
When he addresses the philomaths and basically
yeah, I want your stuff and we will shoot you to get it.
Yeah.
And then the audience,
and then he says, hey, of course, and you're going to fight back, and it will be a war, and we're going to win the war because we outnumber you.
Yes, and the reader is meant to be horrified that the philomath says back to him, "Well, we'll just strike first." So, wow, what a horrid thing that this person is saying. It's just there's a lot of hypocrisy. Right, what else have we got? Moving on through. We've covered the sociologist section.
Perhaps we should move forward to the section where he's making his first speech that she sees.
Yeah, I think that that's most of the forward covered. So it's going to be. Sorry, just finding it. Okay. So I think starting from here. Yeah, so as we were talking about at the very beginning, his argumentation is just to be as blunt and rude as possible. And then when he's treated in kind, the reader is expected to feel shocked that someone could speak so rudely to him. Yeah. So he starts off a dinner party, having been invited by
a
professor. Yeah. Who is, I think, a California professor. So I mean, some things never change. And where should we start? Who wants to read or have any points on the first conversation that we have between Ernest and the others?
Want me to read part of it?
Yeah, if you have any follow-on points from it as well, go for it.
Well, let's see. I'll read half of it. Let's see. Dr. Hammerfeld gasped and managed to answer, "The best of us may be mistaken, young man, the best of us." Ernest's manner changed on the instant. He became another man. "All right, then," he answered. "And let me begin by saying that you are all mistaken. You know nothing, and worse than nothing, about the working class. Your sociology is as vicious and as worthless as your method of thinking." It was not so much what he said as how he said it. I roused at the first sound of his voice. It was as bold as his eyes. It was a clarion call that thrilled me, and the whole table was aroused, shaken alive from monotony and drowsiness. Okay, so this is an example of what I mentioned earlier, that I think London's trying to channel some kind of, it's like eros, and describe, how moving, how passionate the writer feels.
It's a sense of vitality that he's putting into the movement.
Yeah, he's elsewhere described as being the bestest lover ever. We should note that when she says, "I've been made love to by many people, but no one made love to me the way he made love." I think in those days, making love didn't necessarily mean having sex. It meant, courting with extra, maybe kissing and hugging and stuff, but not necessarily.
Snogging, I believe, is the British term.
Yeah, snogging, but not shagging.
Thank you for Britifying the description. Yes. Yeah, because it does read in a modern context. I think the quote is, I've been made love to many times on account of being a female on a university campus or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Never change.
What is so dreadfully vicious and worthless in our method of thinking, young man? Dr. Hammerfeld demanded, and already there was something unpleasant in his voice and manner of utterance. This is another thing that the narrator ascribes kind of ugliness to the other characters, which, and I think that's that's common in fiction, but I think the idea is, because the most important thing is physical reality, that his physical reality is beautiful, and their sort of viciousness is expressed in a physical way also.
Yeah, but we never get, and I think this is a major issue with it, we never get a Mustafa Mond or I can't remember his name in 1984, but we never get that figurehead that represents the opposition, that is sympathetic.
Yeah, or persuasive, right?
Yeah. And as you say, the descriptions, I mean, yes, we see that in the other texts that we've looked at, but every verb used is negative when it comes to the people he's having discussions with. When we go through it, what have we got on the first page? You'll see it more as we go through, but I mean, just on that one, it's demanded, but there's so many where it's, it's absolutely vicious text that he's putting, and like I say, he's painting him in a negative light because he's demanding an answer, and he's already got something unpleasant in his voice. But the person's just stood up and said, "You know nothing, and worse than nothing about the working class. Your sociology is as vicious and as worthless as your method of thinking." I mean, he's not exactly opening himself up to a pleasant critique.
Nothing personal. Yeah. Don't take it personally.
Which he says later on. He's like, "Well, I don't understand why you could be emotionally invested in this. It's not like I'm being incredibly rude to you."
So he's slightly more abrasive than Socrates.
Just a tad.
Yeah.
Sorry, carry on from you are metaphysician.
You are metaphysicians. You can prove anything by metaphysics, and having done so, every metaphysician can prove every other metaphysician wrong to his own satisfaction. You are anarchists in the realm of thought. You are mad cosmos makers. Each of you dwells in a cosmos of his own making, created out of fancies and desires. You do not know the real world in which you live, and your thinking has no place in the real world except insofar as it is phenomena of mental aberration. And I think here part of it is making a claim to, as a member of the working class, he lives in the real world, everybody else lives in fantasy land, right?
Yeah, he's saying that if you're not a materialist, then all you're doing is floating in the clouds.
Yeah, I think there's that, like his metaphysicals, his idea of metaphysics, and then also in addition to that, I think underlying that you have the claim to more authenticity on the grounds of being working class. I think that's there too. You have the luxury and the leisure to do this sort of thing, but we live in the real world over here.
Yeah, we're breaking our backs whilst you're, as he comes to in the next section, you're discussing how many angels could dance on the point of a needle.
Yeah, that old.
Yeah.
That old, what's the word? What I was reminded of as I sat at table and listened to you talk and talk. You reminded me for all the world of the scholastics of the Middle Ages who gravely and learnedly debated the absorbing question of how many angels could dance on the point of a needle. Why, my dear sirs, you are as remote from the intellectual life of the 20th century as an Indian medicine man making incantation in the primeval forest 10,000 years ago. Oh,
Milady.
yeah.
That feeling comes through on so many pages.
Yeah. This. Yeah, he's
Do
quite.
you want me to go back up or? Oh, sorry. Hang on.
But yes, that old Canard, right, about like the reducing the entire kind of scholastic tradition to angels dancing on the head of a pin. That's your Whig history right there.
Yeah, well, you're taking 600 years of history or so,
Yeah.
and reducing it to that diatribe. I mean, well.
And even worse, he's replacing their metaphysics with his own version of metaphysics and just claiming that his one works without any proof.
Yep.
Yeah, the Marxists always they were always careful to claim that they were scientific, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that they were making scientific predictions.
And of course, what we have happen at the next stage is that he tries to make a distinction between the thinkers of metaphysics and the thinkers of scientific innovation. But often throughout history, they're the same people.
Well, the amusing part is that right there, Dr. Hammerfeld's retort. Your terms are rather vague. Just precisely what do you mean when you call us metaphysicians?
What stands out to you about that?
Well, he's throwing it. Hammerfeld is throwing it right back in Ernest's face. Mm-hmm. About his arbitrary redefinition of terms and his manufacture out of whole cloth terms that he then subsequently defines to his benefit rather than the benefit of his opponent, his sparring partner. It's a classic rhetorical technique that is sophistry at its finest. To seize the terms used by your opponent, redefine them, and then brand them with those now redefined terms in order to attack the very foundation of language and understanding.
And they almost never fight back against his reinterpretations of terms.
And then the next statement with Ernest, I call you metaphysicians because you reason metaphysically. Your method of reasoning is the opposite of that of science. There is no validity to your conclusions. You can prove anything, everything, and nothing, and no two of you can agree on anything. Each of you goes as to his own consciousness to explain himself in the universe. As well, you may lift yourselves by your own bootstraps as to explain consciousness by consciousness. Again, he points out the fact that he's causing one of the fundamental logical fallacies of self-referential definitions. He's using words to define themselves. And then he's complaining in the last sentence about them using terms to define themselves. His first sentence is, I call you metaphysicians because you reason metaphysically. That's an axiomatic statement, which is a self-definition of terms. And then at the same time, his last statement, explain consciousness by consciousness. Then he's now criticizing them for doing the exact same thing he did at the start of the paragraph.
But what he's accusing people of stuff he's doing himself?
Yeah, I know. What? It's stunning.
Leftists never do that.
Stunning and brave.
It's fundamentally this whole argument is a rhetorical. It's a master's class in sophistry and rhetoric.
I think that Ernest took AA's foundations of rhetoric, and obviously it did him a lot of good.
Because he just wiped the floor with these people.
Yeah, and then it's just fundamentally going down to and then Dr. Hammerfeld, thank God we are not scientists. What are you then? Philosophers. What is a philosopher if not a scientist?
Indeed.
Well, exactly. So many of the words that he puts into the mouths of the opponents of Ernest are just setting up Ernest. It's easy putt. It's like interviews when you see the obvious question being asked to just set him up for a nice knockout out of the park. None of it is actually invasive of his views, and none of it is something that, as a reader, you could read and think they're making a good point. And this is why I say they need a Mustafa Mond to be on par with that sort of dystopian fiction, because he's so eloquent and so persuasive that it makes you question everything you read up until that point. But I mean, with this, it's so one-sided, which can work for some texts, but for this, you've got a Mary Sue, and everyone else around them is just a fool.
You've got crowds of people around him, and they're all, but which is odd because they're like the lords of the universe, and they're ruling everything, and then all of a sudden they're bowled over by this one guy.
I guess bioleninism got to them.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to when we get to the conversation about the Labour theory of value, because I think in that whole section he he makes the argument that capitalism is so effective that they're making such a surplus that somehow that means socialism. Like, that is one of the most disconnected arguments I've ever read. But we might get to that by the end of this episode.
Well, the crux of this argument comes a couple pages later, where he's talking about the test of truth, etc. So if you'll bump forward to that.
Yeah. So do we want to cover him trying to trap him in this linguistic game about philosophy, or should we just skip on?
I think we've beaten that horse to death.
Yeah, that's fine. Aristotle, no, skip on from him. No.
Oh, keep going. There it is, bottom of that previous
there
page.
We are. Sorry, it's got weird. There we are.
So the test. Never mind the preamble. Give us that which we have sought so long, the test of truth. Give it to us, and we will be as gods.
Knowing good and evil as they do. And that's his quoting from Genesis there.
Mm-hmm. And then Ernest says, Dr. Jordan has stated it very clearly. His test of truth is, will it work? Will you trust your life to it? Psh! Dr. Hammerfeld sneered. You have not taken Bishop Berkeley into account. He has never been answered. The noblest metaphysician of them all, Ernest laughed. But your example is unfortunate. As Berkeley himself attested, his metaphysics didn't work. Dr. Hammerfeld was angry, righteously angry. It was as though he had caught Ernest in a theft or lie. Young man, he trumpeted, that statement is on par with all you have uttered tonight. It is a base and unwarranted assumption. I am
You,
quite... Go ahead.
You, sir, are a vulgarian.
I am quite crushed, Ernest murmured meekly. Only I don't know what hit me. You'll have to put it in my hand, Doctor. I will, Dr. Hammerfeld sputtered. How do you know? You do not know that Bishop Berkeley attested that his metaphysicians did not work. You have no proof, young man. They have always worked. I take it as proof that Berkeley's metaphysics did not work because Berkeley made an invariable practice of going through doors instead of walls, because he trusted his life to the solid bread and butter and roast beef, because he shaved himself with a razor that worked when it removed the hair from his face. But those are actual things. Metaphysics is of the mind, and they work in the mind. And even a multitude of angels can dance on the point of a needle in the mind. And a blubber-eating, fur-clad god can something. And this is going back to the point of, and this This is so core to where socialists are right in the track. They're fundamentally recognizing reality, and then they just all of a sudden jump it and go off in a left field. Because Ernest now has become the man who is defending reality, defending practicality, and defending existence against thought experiments by esoteric elites. And then I don't know how he manages it, because it's not logical. He then spontaneously decides to redefine his terms and redefine reality to fit his particular version of a theoretical environment.
Yeah. Do you know that? I mean, you put it very well, and I'm going to bring it down to a very base meme. Do you know that X plus Y equal profit? That sort of layout where it's just, there's no reason why what's being spat out at the end should equal socialism. I've had this sort of nihilism for a long time, and existentialism.
Mm-hmm.
So many of these writers, I mean, even if you take nihilism and if it's correct, then a lot of them are very articulate with it and they understand it. But there's no... To me, I don't see what that missing link is, where they then say, well, if all of this is true, then communism. I mean, I don't see the connection. What? Yeah, okay, existentialism is correct. Where's that missing link? What am I not understanding? Is it me being stupid, or is it them just? Is it the Frankfurt School being deceptive? I think I know which one, but if I'm wrong, I'd like to know.
Mm-hmm.
Look at Sartre. Didn't he try and write a second book explaining how he concluded with communism, but couldn't, because he couldn't figure out how to explain it.
And Maoism in particular.
Yeah, he was specifically a Maoist link, wasn't it?
Yeah. Marxism is a weird meld of part of it is like a Christian heresy where they secularize the apocalypse, right? The sort of idea of time and ending in the heavenly Jerusalem, try to bring that into the material world, and then also create a pseudoscience to convince people if that didn't work, then we're not a religion. We have a science here, and we can.
We're more rational than that. We wouldn't have one of those.
Yeah, and our predictions are scientific. You're going to be able to see the results under a microscope, right? And we can accurately predict.
Yeah, and just going back to what he said here, where's the metaphysics? Just allow me to replace one word in this section. You are rationalists. You can prove anything by rationalism, and have done so. Every rationalist can prove every other rationalist wrong to his own satisfaction. That simple retort kind of shuts down a lot of what follows from Ernest. But obviously, the straw man is strong with this one. So, do
you remember the gloss on the word utopia when he's accused of utopianism, or somebody mumbles utopianism or something?
Yeah,
and there's a gloss thing.
Yeah, that's at his first meeting with the small business owners.
Yeah,
I think.
And this time you could just say a word and that that defeated everybody. So if you just called something utopian, then that was enough to discredit it.
Mm-hmm. Can't imagine what it would be living in a world where you just label someone with a word and it shuts down all their arguments. Anyway, so just
it couldn't happen in this day. We evolved past that point. That's obvious.
Yeah. Can you believe that in 1907 they lived in such a world? How primitive. Just again, to bring attention to the use of language. On the next page that we were just looking at. it is. Yeah. Well, look at the way it's being framed. This is what I mean, where it's so lopsided. You've got Hammerfeld sneering and Ernest laughing back. Hammerfeld is being righteously angry and trumpeting. He's spluttering. He's crying. Everything is so. I the entire time I was reading it, I just thought this use of language is ridiculous. Like, it's beyond ridiculous. It made me think of Frankenstein multiple times.
Yeah, but that has been written by an actual teenager. But
well,
yeah. This also reminds me of all those thumbnails, like so and so destroys that person in that argument, and that person is brought it, and then you watch it, and it's just two people just discussing, like, yeah, I just don't agree with him.
Yeah, the Turlification of Jack London. Ernest destroys cardinals in conversation.
There's nothing left. The destruction of his argument.
He was ground back into dust from which he came.
You won't believe what he says next. Right, let's.
I disagree.
Was that? What do you disagree with?
No. That's what he says next.
Oh, sorry. Right. So, I think we probably covered this enough. Sorry. No, there was one more thing I wanted to cover on this. One of the few elements of this conversation that I think might be accurate is his discussion of them being part of the enemy camp. Just at the bottom here, you have nothing in common with the working class. Your hands are soft with the workers others have performed for you. Your stomachs are round with the plenitude of eating, and your minds are filled with doctrines that are buttresses of the established order. You're as much mercenaries as were the men of the Swiss Guard. Be true to your salt and your hire. Guard with your preaching the interests of your employers, but do not come down to the working class and serve as false leaders. You cannot honestly be in the two camps at once. What he's trying to, what we would kind of establish that now as being is these people being members of the cathedral, sort of writing high-minded, what we'd have now is, progressive articles or anything like that, where it's just all intellectualizing, but there's no substance to it. What he's doing is accusing them of that. And, it might be accurate, but it seems to be a common theme where there's always this intellectual crust around the power structure that's there to intellectualize, but the result has to be a defense of the current structure.
Well, this goes back to the recent contention between Don and AA about the elites versus the plebs.
There goes this stream. It's going to be an hour on that.
Wait for it.
Well, it's the contention. Ernest's contention is that the elites don't have anything to teach the plebs and can't understand the position of the plebs anyway, which is wrong on the face of it.
Well, I would change that slightly. I think what he's saying is that there's always an intellectual crust that will sit about pontificating, but their result always has to be a defense of the current structure. So I think the current schism between the Don and AA sides is a little bit different because we're dealing with dissident elites already. So I think that the elites that he's referring to in this are people that are within that the power structure.
So it's the royal court rather than
yeah.
But that debate is within the same ranks, I guess.
Yeah. The closest comparison you'd get is someone like the. My brain is actively trying to forget so much content of this, but the. Sorry, I can't remember his name. We'll come to him later on, and I'm sure I can bring it up then. It's like we're just trying to reject this book completely. So let's move on to the second chapter.
Well, then there's the physical perfection, regardless of his bulging muscles and his prize fighter's throat. He impressed me as an ingenious boy. Yada yada yada.
Mhm. So this is where she's fighting against her feelings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So establishing the love story between the two of them.
Well, this is the section where basically he says, "I'm right, you're wrong, and I'll prove it to you."
Mm-hmm. I think we can probably just get to that. Oh, just this footnote again, going to the enlightened age in which they're currently living. Sorry.
Comparison to a roaring lion.
There we are. The distinction between native-born and foreign-born was sharp and invidious in those days. So obviously hinting at the fact that in the current time that they're writing, I think this PDF might have cut off quite a lot of the footnotes because there's
internationalism there rearing its head, right?
Yeah, and it comes up again later on where it says that the people that, in those days, the people that came off the Mayflower considered themselves to be more American, but obviously that silly concept is now gone. So that there's this constant referencing to internationalism.
Mm-hmm.
She basically has a sex dream about him. Yeah. So let's skip on. Yes, it's the bishop that I was talking about.
Morehouse.
Yeah, Morehouse. Yeah. So when it comes to a dissident elite, he would be the closest example that we have. Obviously, it's kind of inverted, but he's probably the closest example. So we can probably just get to when they talk about Jackson.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, this is the class hatred section that we were previously discussing, though.
Well, if you jump on a little bit further, you can talk about how Ernest, that section there, about how Ernest says, this is what man is, and the bishop agrees, and then he says, I got you, and then he completely and totally sets up the case, and then all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah. So here we have Ernest agreeing to the ideas of man being innately selfish, and then proposing a system which negates the idea of man being selfish. So again, this is why he's a master. He's a master in rhetoric, but everything is just a veneer to win arguments.
I mean, is this the idea of socialism? Is that somehow it's like it's a fix of human nature. It's going to make human nature permanently different.
Yeah, right there in the middle of the page. Yes, they're quarreling over the division of the earnings of the street railways. Bishop Morehouse became excited. It is wrong, he cried. It is so short-sighted on the part of the working man. How can they hope to keep our sympathy? When we are compelled to walk, Ernest said slyly. But Bishop Morehouse ignored him and went on. Their outlook is too narrow. Men should be men, not brutes. There will be violence and murder now, and sorrowing widows and orphans. Capital and labor should be friends. They should work hand in hand and to their mutual benefit. Ah, now you are up in the air again, Ernest remarked dryly. Come back to earth. Remember, we agreed that the average man is selfish. But he ought not to be, the bishop cried. And there I agree with you, was Ernest's rejoinder. He ought not to be selfish, but he will continue to be selfish as long as he lives in a social system that is based on pig ethics. No, he will always continue to be selfish because he is man.
Yes. Yeah. That last section there just slyly slipped in as a way of saying, well, here, let me provide an alternative social system which is not based on pig ethics, in which man will become perfect.
That, more than anything else, is the nail in the coffin of why communism and socialism doesn't work, because it expects men to be other than men.
Mm-hmm.
Humans evolved as a species to try to be efficient because we are, for better or worse, hunters. We are the top of the food chain, and we hunt and kill other animals for sustenance. And hunters can't be constantly hunting because they expend too much energy in the hunt if they are unsuccessful.
And here we have perhaps the first example of silence is violence. The church does not protest it. And in so far as the church does not protest, it condones. Remember, the church is supported by the capitalist class. So again, it's there's certain things that pop up in this that are surprisingly fresh, considering it's just over 110 years old. Not least of which is the fact that it is all rhetoric.
Yeah. And although he's not wrong in that tacit, failure to protest is tacit assent. He's not wrong there.
No, it's true, but it's always used one way now. So,
and that's one of the things that really fries my egg when it comes to communists and socialists is they identify everything correctly, and then step 2 still, is questionable, but the step 3 is communism.
Yeah,
there's no way to get from A to C. There is no B.
It's basically the underpants gnomes.
Yes.
But underpants, question marks, and then you have profit. And what's in between? Yeah, we'll figure that out.
That's what I was referring to. I couldn't remember what the first one was. Yeah. Equals profit. What? Yeah, you never know what step 2 is. And step 2 is usually obfuscated by a load of language. They just throw out simulacra and blah 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 blah. But it's just it's just airy fairy. I mean, after this conversation of metaphysicians are always up in the air, step 2 just seems to be shrouded in mystery, and then equals communism.
And then that was taken off of an old comic where 2 scientists are looking at a board, and there's a bunch of math, and then in the middle then a miracle occurs, and then there's another section of math, and one guy says to the other guy, "I think you need to be explicit, a little more explicit in step 2."
Okay. They go on to slavery.
One of the interesting things about the book overall is the lack of condemnation for church in the footnotes.
Yeah, it's sort of just not discussed.
Yeah,
the main negative section about anything to do with the church is this page. Beyond that, there's no real mention, and I do wonder if he comes from a Protestant background. I'm assuming he does, because they use Jesus as a figure of of a high quality man. So it isn't exactly anti-religious, but it's anti-church establishment. So I do feel like there's this sort of Protestant ethic behind it.
I picture their church as being like the Episcopal, like mainline Protestant churches. That's kind of how I picture it.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of churches that in the U.S. and Canada more or less kind of folded up their tents, and but,
yeah.
Which maybe there's a connection between how, like, what went on with this class, previously, and what's happened now, and sort of how that elite, that group, like especially WASP elites in the US, like, the New England WASP elites have all sort of, most of them become progressives. That they don't have that confident, they have to mask their elitism as something else.
It does seem that papists can resist the influence of communism a hell of a lot stronger.
Really? I submit to you the current Pope.
He's not a communist.
Well, like he's not a communist, and just because he's the Pope, I'm talking about the nations. I think more than the actual institution. You
have that like tradition in Latin America of like the liberation theology. There is that strain.
Mm-hmm. Latin America is probably the best example of where they do fall foul of it. But on the whole, To me, it seems they're
taken
less
over.
likely to fall into it.
Yeah, and there's still a strong, very strong Orthodox side to Catholicism that's kind of independent. But yeah, when they're talking about the church, that's, I kind of picture mainline Protestants, not even kind of more.
Well, yeah, that's the Universalist Unitarian branch of Christianity, where there's no focus really on the gospel or the actual laws laid down by the church and the demonstration of what it is to be a good Christian.
Yeah, and they're
versus wash the feet of the poor and throw all your money at the sick and the destitute because that's moral.
They're eager to make their peace with the world. I find that with science and things like that, they're sort of on the back foot. That's how it feels like. Maybe there'll be a recovery. But that's what I picture when he talks about the church.
So the next major plot point to cover is as a way of proving how desolate the poor have it. Ernest tells Evelyn to go and talk to Jackson. Which, is there anything from their conversation that you want to cover? I can't think of there being anything particularly interesting from it.
I would amputate Jackson's other arm as an example.
Jackson is our official martyr and kind of example of.
Yeah, that's the kind of like false rhetoric that is used. Like, we have this one example that proves that you're evil. While usually in these cases, when you start to look into it, you discover that the guy had a history or something else going on, or that he's trying to fleece the company or things like that.
Or he was drunk.
Yeah, and it might be true that the company has better lawyers because they can afford them. And it might be true that that it's unfair to him, but the fact that they just bring up one case and then base their whole morality on this, like, we are moral because we won't allow this, but you do, so you are immoral.
To counteract that, there's the third paragraph on the page right now. It's the hundreds and hundreds and children too. So apparently this happens all the time.
Yes, Helen Lovejoy.
I'm trusting that the manuscript and the writing is representative.
Yeah.
Because if you doubt that, then you can just poke holes in the entirety of it anyway.
Yeah. Okay, that's true. But the thing is, yes, it is horrible, perhaps, but that does not mean that the whole system has to be broken down and rebuilt from the ground up.
Well, the argument is it could be as horrific as you like. If it, let's go along with this line of thought. There's hundreds and hundreds of people getting their arms torn off, and children are dying constantly. The question is what's being proposed by Ernest a better solution?
Yeah.
Well, Ernest believes in it, but he doesn't give any proof. He just
exactly. That's the thing. The system is shown to be corrupt. Okay, yeah. But there's again, it goes back to what we're talking about, equaling profit. There's no middle point in which they say, and this is why the new system is better. It's just, this is a corrupt system. Now, let's not look at any of the flaws in the new system, and let's just march into revolution.
Even after Ernest himself argued that man is selfish, so man will corrupt the system.
Mm-hmm.
So any system will be corrupted over time. So. And he gives no guarantee in how to prevent that.
He uses the word slavery a few times in a way that, now, of course, when we hear slavery, it's usually a stick to beat us with about historical Black slavery, right? But at this time, it seems that slavery is just another word for the working, the condition of the working class.
Yeah. Yeah, a wage slave is what they're being described as.
Yeah, and they're not even. It's interesting because it's not that far from the Civil War and all that, stuff. But it's not really. It doesn't really seem to come up. At least I haven't finished yet. But Does it come up anywhere else? African
In
slavery?
what respect?
Just black slavery.
Slavery? I don't think so.
Only in the section that we've gone past a moment ago do they mention that when they bashed the church about saying that the church gave support to slavery. Yeah. Okay.
One of the things that, again, this is a good example of them identifying the problem and then making a right turn as to the appropriate solution is the control of the court system.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I had the ghost of a chance, but Colonel Ingram and Judge Caldwell are pretty friendly. You know.
Yeah. Whereas in the new system, Colonel Ingram and the judge would be the same person.
Are the same person. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so they're a little bit more friendly.
Yeah.
Skipping on from this. Yeah, so this chapter is just being used to illustrate to go through Dante's Inferno and show how corrupt and evil the world is.
Well, it's more how corrupt and evil the legal system is than anything else.
Yeah, the current institution.
Right, the courts and the laws have been co-opted by the powerful interests, which, again, they're absolutely right. They have been. But the solution is not to make it even more powerful. The solution is to make it less powerful.
Mm-hmm.
So the solution to a big state is not making it bigger.
Yes.
Dickens is more entertaining in his critique of these problems. 19th century the idea of like the 19th century capitalist, the problems with 19th century capitalism. Right?
Well, as we spoke about on our Christmas Carol reading,
Mm-hmm.
I think that a lot of what Dickens was talking about was not state enforced. It was a charitable. It was trying to bring the entrepreneur back to feeling the sort of aristocratic need to support the lower classes, because there was this sort of schism in which the new capitalists were forgetting their role as a
noblesse oblige.
Yeah. So I think that he was. I think that he's really not a socialist writer. I think it's. I think that he's taken out of context and he's made to fit that framework, but it doesn't actually fit because he's never saying it needs to be legally mandated. He's saying you're taking on the position in the hierarchy of this. You're taking on this role, and this is the duty that you have to the people around you.
Yeah, he's trying to inspire that duty in people instead of replace the whole system.
Yeah.
But his description of the problems is very entertaining.
And he's a great writer. To me, you compare the two of them, it's night and day. But as Brandon has said, other texts of Jack London's might be better written, but I not feeling it on this one. I do want to actually explain to people. I know it's probably a little bit late considering we're an hour and 25 minutes in, but we kind of went into this one blind, and I wanted to look at it because it's one of the very first examples of dystopian literature. And I do think this holds some value in analyzing it, but I wouldn't recommend that anyone read it. If you're interested in it, go for it.
Wasn't it on a list of top 10 books that you have to read or something that you found?
Yeah, I mean, who wrote that? God only knows. But
a leftist.
They read 9 books and they had to fill it out. I think one more book to make it a top 10.
Just there rubbing their legs, thinking, "Whoa, those capitalists are so terrible. Look."
It's like a scene. Let's carry on. My mind is melting thinking of.
It's like it's just them reading it. Just it's Greta Thunberg, isn't it? Like berating them. It's all the same kind of thing. It's look how terrible they are. Look how terrible we are.
I was just thinking of Shooting Stars when you said about rubbing their legs.
Yeah,
It's Vic Reeves talking about how evil socialists are, how evil capitalists are. Right, let's carry on. Let's carry on.
This next couple sections or couple chapters are about her verifying and ensuring that the attestation of his arm is accurate. And she goes and talks to the attorneys on both sides, and she talks to the people who testified in this case. And the long and the short of it is, the corporate interests wanted this case put to bed because they didn't want to set a precedent, and they got the lawyers and the courts to go along with them, because if they didn't, they would stop paying them. So there's nothing really of note in here except for that little movement of the plot forward.
She goes and visits some society ladies, and the society ladies, maybe it's like she's seeing the kind of lady that she might become and thinking like,
yeah,
I don't want to be like these ladies.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be a reflection of what she would have been if she had not met Ernest.
Married Ernest Everhard.
Next week we'll do 50 Shades of Grey.
I'm not ashamed to say it's not until you've spoken out loud that slips by. I mean, Ernest was on the nose enough, but
hard man is good to find.
Life is hard, and so am I.
Right, moving swiftly on. Anything else on Jackson? Let's. This is her talking to the ladies, and to the newspaper writers as a journalist. She speaks to as well.
Yeah, it's basically just the gravy train keeps rolling, and won't let anybody get in the way of the gravy.
They aped their husbands. That one jumped out at me. They aped their husbands.
Yes.
That was a colloquialism at the time.
Yeah.
I like that even in this utopian writing, he couldn't get past insulting the Irish as well.
The Irish, yeah, they have how is it framed as the bull is bull?
Yeah, verbal contradictions. This is actually slightly rephrased from the one I've got. If I remember correctly, mine says verbal contradictions, something often employed by the Irish, resulted in this term. It's a bit more of a snide remark against them, but
yeah, I had that
down
too.
there.
Yeah, it was like a reference to the sort of the nature of the Irish.
The IQ, yeah. Oh, that's more fitting than I thought, actually. Irish question.
Yeah, we're verbal contradictions called bulls were long unamiable weakness of the ancient Irish.
The ancient Irish as well.
Okay, so on chapter 5, we get to Ernest has already had a few conversations with different people, but kind of a one-up from the conversation that we see at the very beginning of the book. He then has a conversation with a group called the Philomaths. And again, we get more spluttering and more of his epic burns against the Philomaths. So, something we see time and time again is that the father of Evelyn is in all of these circles and kind of brings him along as a just to cause some chaos. He's like the Joker. Some people just want to watch the party burn. Yeah. So
he invited me in order to tear me to pieces. So he's supposed to address this group of this high-minded group, and they think they're going to tear him to pieces, but he tears them to pieces.
Oh no.
Yes, despite the fact that every person he comes across is incredibly rude to, they somehow have the impression that he's a mild-mannered member of the working class. So that's why they invite him, and he plays that role up until the point where he knows that he has them in his grip, and then he busts out his attack.
It's his lamb into lion routine that he does.
Yes.
And then they just accept it.
Yeah, and then they let's go through it and look at it.
There is just one point I'd like to make on that, which is this is classic doctrinaire tactics of socialists. Play meek, play mild until you get to a position of power, and then unsheath the claws.
Yeah, cry out in pain whilst you're the one throwing the punches.
The Fabian Society, don't they have? Is it the wolf in sheep's clothing as their icon? I think they have a wolf in sheep's clothing as their icon. And isn't that Blair's kind of whole technique?
I don't know about his surplus arguments.
I mean, subversion is their strongest tool and always has been, I think, which kind of fits into that wolf in sheep's clothing idea.
So it's this sheep either turns into a wolf or a lion, but
I mean, his main argument is like those damn capitalists are just so productive and efficient.
Yeah, well, that kind of comes up a lot in the next section when he's speaking to the small business owners.
It's almost like it's the most efficient system we have.
And the other aspect, which I think he definitely covers on that next part that we'll look at, but in this conversation, there's a lot of accusations about other systems being materialistic, even though he classes himself as a materialist. And socialism is a system founded on materialism. I think it's this section that we're looking at here. Just try and find it.
Well, I mean, there's the classic again straw manning of the communists in this perspective.
And here he's
amongst the revolutionists, I found also warm faith in the human, ardent idealism, sweetness and selfishness, renunciation and martyrdom, all the splendid stinging things of the spirit, yada, yada, yada.
He is compared to Christ, or she compares him to Christ on several occasions. Like, heard it again. He stands, I seen him stand transfigured, and now he stood transfigured before me. His eyebrows were bright with the divine that was in him. And brighter yet shone his eyes from the midst of the radiance that seemed to envelop him as a mantle. But others did not see this radiance.
Yeah, so this covers both of them in one here. It was true that they prattled sweet little ideals and dear little moralities, but in spite of their prattle, the dominant key of the life that they lived was materialistic, and they were without real morality. For instance, that which Christ had preached, but which was no longer preached. So he's using this as an argument against their system, but on multiple occasions he says that he's a materialist, and the system being put forward is a materialist system. So how is it a critique against the strawmanned capitalist system that it's materialist? I would agree that it is an issue that it's purely materialist, but the system being put forward is even worse in that respect. So none of this pans out.
It feels like it would all crumble with one good argument, which is not made.
Yeah, absolutely.
Was this when did Jack London produce this in terms of his career? Was it like early or late? Do we know? Did he get more?
That I don't know.
Well, let's have a look. It came out in 1907, I believe. Let's go into his bibliography. So it seems to be kind of smack bang. I think he did short stories quite quite a while. So he was writing for 12 years.
Right.
Something, I
So-
think it's something like almost 300 novels.
Yeah, there's a lot of short stories. So I mean, he had been writing for over a decade at least when this came out. So it's not like he had any teething problems.
I wonder if he stuck to this kind of perspective all his life.
Well, I think in previous discussions I mentioned that he was closely affiliated with Upton Sinclair.
Yeah.
On the publication of The Jungle, he told Sinclair, "You're going a bit too far there." No one's going to believe that. That's a little bit too beyond the pale. Which, you know, when you're reading through this, really, I haven't read The Jungle, but I dread to think of what's in that.
I did a long time ago. I researched Upton Sinclair for a project, and they really were quite similar, like in the 30s, and this is like during the Depression, so conditions were a little intense, but he ran for governor of California on this platform called EPIC, End Poverty in California, and very radical proposals. I remember he used the bee. He insisted on using the bee as his emblem, and which comes up a couple times at least in this text. There's a beehive in this chapter. Actually, there's a beehive image. Right there, the worker bees are going to kill the drones.
Well, I mean, it's a fitting comparison when you think of the worker bees and then there being a queen bee, which is, absolute ruler over the rest, and how they want humanity to have a hive mind. I think beehive actually is very fitting.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's a very anti-individualistic book.
They want to kill the bee, the queen bee.
They want to kill the queen bee and replace the queen bee with themselves.
And Sinclair was doing battle with William Randolph Hearst all the time. I thought story's quite entertaining. He didn't win, by the way.
With a party called Epic, really? Yeah. I mean, that again just sounds quite modern because of the level of cringe involved.
Maybe it sounds modern because they're still banging the same drum, like 100
yeah.
years
Well,
later.
this is what I mean. It shows that there's nothing new under the sun. I mean, so many of these tricks, of these naming tactics, these argumentation points, we're talking about over 100 years have passed, and none of it's changed.
And it's all linguistic. So if they really had a better system, then they just would start and immediately outcompete anybody around them, even if they face stiff competition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, language games are a crucial aspect of socialism.
Yeah, on the next page, there's a paragraph that very succinctly outlines the straw manning of the opposition that London does. In that, where he says, but first I must say that his terrible diatribe had not touched them. I looked about me at their faces and saw that they remained complacently superior to what he had charged. And I remembered what he had told me, that no indictment of their morality could shake them. However, I could see that the boldness of his language had affected Miss Brentwood. She was looking worried and apprehensive. So this categorizes all of the philomaths as completely and totally inured to blatant abuses of power, which is literally what he's gone on about for the last 3 or 4 pages, which is flatly untrue of pretty much everybody of that class at that time. Most of the people in that class at the time were trying to figure out ways to avoid killing their workers and avoid causing their workers to no longer be able to work. Because the Industrial Revolution, which is one of the cornerstones that occurred in the late 19th century, was people were using industrial and manufacturing processes they barely understood to multiply the output of a single worker by a factor of 10. So they didn't know any better. They didn't understand. They barely understood the concept of what they were doing. The whole the entire rooms being run off of a single steam engine in a sewing house without any kind of a gear or gearing system or transmission meant that the needles punched at the same time at all 60 stations in the machine in the station. So that in the warehouse, in the factory. So they had to work that way. As technology advanced and as they moved forward, they were able to bring to bear more safety protocols in place, but they were running right at the edge of technology at the time.
Yeah, and I think that, again, some of the arguments that could be made against the Industrial Revolution aren't really touched on here, are the non-material arguments, the sort of imposed modernization upon the populace. There might be some critiques that are valid if you want to get carrot pilled. but none of those arguments are being made here because it is all viewed from a materialist standpoint. So if that's the foundation on which you're arguing, then there's no comparison.
Yes,
it's not effective.
If you're just talking about the material effects and the how much wealth a certain system can produce, then there's no competition really. But if you're talking about, but they're not discussing the spiritual or other effects on the population.
No, because what argument could they provide on that? Right. So.
And then the next couple paragraphs. No, the paragraph I wanted to point out was the before that a little bit. Such an army of the revolution.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to touch on that as well.
No, it's before this section, I thought.
5 men, yeah. Here we are. 25 million strong.
There, yeah. So, such an army of revolution, 25 million strong, is a thing to make rulers and the ruling classes pause and consider. The cry of the army is this: no quarter. We want all that you possess. We will be content with nothing less than all you possess. We want in our hands the reins of power and the destiny of mankind. Here are our hands. They are strong hands. We are going to take your governments, your palaces, and all your purpled ease away from you. And in that day you shall work for your bread, even as the peasant in the field or the starved and runty clerk in your metropolis. Here are our hands. They are strong hands. and the surprise is that people are violently opposed to this.
Yeah. And then they have the audacity to say, well, we'll strike first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I mean that's the throwing down of the gauntlet. And later on, he's pointing out that on the next page, 5 men can produce bread for 1,000. 1 man can produce cotton cloth for 250 people, woolens for 300, and boots and shoes for 1,000. One would conclude from this that under capable management of society, modern civilized man would be a great deal better off than the caveman. He is.
Yes.
But is he? Let us see. In the United States today, there are 15 million people living in poverty. And by poverty is meant that condition in life in which, through lack of food and adequate shelter, the mere standard of working efficiency cannot be maintained. In the United States today, despite all your so-called labor legislation, there are 3 million of child laborers. In 12 years, their numbers have doubled. And in passing, I will ask you, managers of society, why you did not make public the census figures of 1910. And I will answer for you that you were afraid. The figures of misery would have precipitated the revolution that even now is gathering.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point because there were no children working when we were cavemen. They were all homeschooled. It was just a life of luxury.
Yeah, the blatant straw manning here is infuriating.
They just went from one play date to another.
Yeah, I'm going down the cave to Tom's hovel.
It was the Shire, essentially.
Oh yes. It's just a bunch of little round doors in hills.
The idea is all like the Darling Buds of Mere, right up until everybody was dragged into the cities to work in on the looms.
Mm-hmm.
So when agriculture started, that man was enslaved because then we had to till the fields. Before that, we could just eat berries and stuff we found on the ground. It was so much better.
Obviously.
I do like that he brings up is the 1910 census figures the ones that got burned down for reasons not yet explained?
Yes.
Oh, hang on. No, it can't. Because they wouldn't have been around then, because this was 1907. Unless that's a very strange coincidence. When were those records burnt? Because this would have been 3 years. This would have been written 3 years prior to that happening.
Yeah. I'm sure. I don't know.
I'm not sure. Oh, 1890, I think, was the one that got banned. Oh, no, sorry. The 1910 one was included. That's very strange. That's very, very odd that that was an example that he used, and they were one of the ones that got banned, I think. Anyway.
Maybe he was involved in the plot.
The plot thickens. So, and then he talks about mismanagement. I think that we might conclude it before we get to the small business owners, because it'd be a fun one to start on next time, as we'll probably spend quite a lot of time on that chapter alone.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, half of the book is just Ernest spouting stuff like this, telling people that there's something better without proving it, and then at some point, Ernest luckily shuts up, and then it's just all mayhem and misery.
Well, the crux of it is that something happens in the book that is blatantly impossible, and because it didn't happen and hasn't happened in the U.S. since then, it's that the socialists managed to get a majority in the electorate, in the government.
What was it that they said that people in the U.S. are just basically temporary embarrassed millionaires instead of being jealous of other people's wealth? And that would be the reason why America didn't turn to socialism, because of the American dream.
Yeah. And so in the 1900 census, there were 76 million people in America, up 21% from the previous census. In 1910, there was supposed to be 92 million, an increase of 16 million. And he's saying that there are 15 million people in poverty, which, okay. I mean, as a percentage at that time in history, 15% or even 20% of your population being in poverty. And again, as he defines poverty.
Yeah, define poverty.
Well, he defines it as the inability to continue to work due to malnutrition. So,
that's an awesome one. That having a job is the end all of everything, like the full employment myth.
Yeah.
So he goes like, yeah, well, if you have a job and the job basically provides everything that you need, then you're happy. It's again very materialistic.
Low bar.
And 40% of the population in 1900 was urban, whereas 45% was urban in 1910. and 50% in 1920. So as this is happening, what we're seeing is a transition from a rural agrarian economy to a modern industrialized economy, and the poverty and starvation that was not out of the ordinary in the rural areas was being brought to the fore in the urban areas, which is the people have starved and died from starvation due to mistakes they made or mistakes their parents made throughout history.
So basically, what you're saying, just to get in Newman here for a second, is that he's basically using statistics in order to prove a point, but then misrepresenting or misinterpreting so he's taken all this information, flattens it to a single number, and then uses that as validation for his actions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's done multiple times.
Because like before the Industrial Revolution, it was basically one bad harvest and everyone's going to starve, you know. And then his argument later on for why we need socialism is because we're so good at producing stuff now that, you know, when every country has a surplus, so there's no one to sell it to, then then that's kind of where he's at. Whereas it's like, oh no, we can't stop producing this one thing and just make another thing instead, you know. It doesn't seem, it's like they just can't stop producing. It's like, what is wrong with them?
Yeah, well, it's sort of dividends. Like it's almost the argument that a company a company cannot fail because it's producing too much, and that overproduction doesn't have an influence on overall economy and prices.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if the only time that what he's describing happens is under, you know, the USSR, isn't it? I mean,
I do love the retort
keep
back.
producing. They just keep reproducing the thing that nobody wants, you know, just because they've been told.
And if we bump back to the section where Colonel Van Gilbert retorts fallacy upon fallacy section. I think it's, yeah, there you go. Never in all my life have I heard so many fallacies uttered in one short hour. And besides, young man, I must tell you that you have said nothing new. I learned all that in college before you were born. Jean-Jacques Rousseau enunciated your socialistic theory nearly 2 centuries ago. A return to the soil, forsooth, reversion. Our biology teaches the absurdity of it. It has been truly said that a little learning is a dangerous thing, and you have exemplified it tonight with your madcap theories. Fallacy upon fallacy. I was never so nauseated in my life with overplus of fallacy. That's for your immature generalizations and childish reasonings. And he goes on, and then he comes back to says, as for you, he went on, turning toward Colonel Van Gilbert. Next page, I think. As for you, he went on, turning towards Colonel Van, you have replied to nothing I have said. You have merely made a few excited and dogmatic assertions about my mental caliber. That may serve you in your business, but you can't talk to me like that. I am not a working man, cap in hand, asking you to increase my wages or to protect me from the machine at which I work. You cannot be dogmatic with truth when you deal with me. Save that for dealing with your wage slaves. They will not dare to reply to you because you hold their bread and butter, their lives in your hands. As for this return to nature that you say you learned at college before I was born, permit me to point out that, on the face of it, you cannot have learned anything since. Socialism has no more to do with the state of nature than has differential calculus with a Bible class. I have called your class stupid when outside the realm of business. You, sir, have brilliantly exemplified my statement.
Is this guy 8 years old?
Don't take my word for it. Your own authorities with one unanimous voice will prove you stupid. Your own hired purveyors of knowledge will tell you that you are wrong. Go to your meekest little assistant instructor of sociology and ask him what is the difference between Rousseau's theory of the return to nature and the theory of socialism. Ask your greatest orthodox bourgeois political economists and sociologists. Question through the pages of every textbook written on the subject and stored on the shelves of your subsidized libraries. And from one and all, the answer will be that there is nothing congruous between the return to nature and socialism. On the other hand, the unanimous affirmative answer will be that the return to nature and socialism are diametrically opposed to each other. As I say, don't take my word for it. The record of your stupidity is there in the books, and your own books that you never read. And so far as your stupidity is concerned, you are but the exemplar of your class. This whole thing is, again, a straw man that was never asserted by Gilbert.
Mhm.
And the Rousseauian prescription is the philosophical basis on which sociology and Marxism is based. Yes, they have decided to subsume and envelop and embrace the mechanical nature of the Industrial Revolution as a mechanism to provide for all of the needs of society, but they still retain in their core the perspective of tabula rasa, of the noble savage, of man in nature being pristine, which is the fundamental assumption on which it's all based, and the fundamental premise that of its failure.
And equal as well.
Yeah, obviously, this retort is not addressing any of the issues. He just says fallacy, multiple times, which is then answered with, "You don't know anything I'm talking about." I mean, neither of them are addressing the points actually being made. But Ernest is being portrayed as having slapped him down. This is nothing but rhetoric.
Right.
And then we get his answer, which is nothing but rhetoric. So the only actual argument that's being put forward is the one that originally is being said by Ernest, which is wrong, and no one addresses it. So,
right.
And it's just this constant throughout the book. No one is actually having a conversation with each other. It's all being done to frame arguments in a positive light. It's not a conversation. And this actually touches on something that a lot of people view novels as an inferior art form because of this very thing. With film, with certain elements of non-fiction, with plays, you often get differentiating voices throughout. And with well-written novels, you can find different voices. But in poor novels and in poor fiction in general, you have one voice and everything is framed to amplify that voice. And this is this to me is one of the prime examples I've ever read of something that is just there as a framework to propagate what the voice is saying. I think that isn't something. So
I was just going to say that's not necessarily present in. There are a lot of what are considered to be good novels that have that same failing.
I agree. It's not something that we've really spoken about before, but just looking back at what we've read previously, Christmas Carol as an example, it does sort of do that, but it's well written and it's enjoyable, and it's not just full of crap. It's not an essential part of a novel, but I think a lot of people have a negative view towards novel because of this. Because they find that all it is a propagation of one voice. It's not an inherent failing of a novel, but it can be when it's nothing but a framework for an opinion.
I mean, successful fiction draws us into another world and makes us believe, because it follows its own rules. It's not just there to, again, it's not didactic. It's not just there to project a certain set of ideas. And we can suspend our disbelief and enter into that world and explore it,
Yeah. I mean, again, going through what we've read previously, I think that Heller does this quite a lot. He uses Yossarian as his voice, and then every other character that they interact with is sort of there as a setup for Yossarian to go on a diatribe.
It works if a novel has been written from a certain point of view. So like in Catch-22, it's all written from the point of Yossarian, and then it doesn't feel odd that it has one voice. Here you could say more or less the same, because it's a wife writing about her husband, idealizing him.
Yeah, but that's
So-
obviously just a a setup
Yeah,
to
framing
justify.
but that would be an in-world explanation of it.
Yeah.
But it does make the novel, this novel, kind of, like I'm having to find the right superlative for it to know what I mean. It's like it's like reading fan fiction, in my opinion. Like,
Well, it's a tradition that goes all the way back to Plato. Most of Plato's writings were Socrates upbraiding morons who were there only to make Socrates look good. Behold a man.
Okay, Omo.
Like the support band.
Exactly.
But they're not but they're not, I don't know, like they're philosophical discourses, and they're there for that reason, to promote certain ideas. You know, it's the fact that that they have this kind of fictional dimension to them is just a feature, you know.
Well, the problem with, at least my problem with much of Plato's writing, is that his continual tendency to do the same thing that London's doing in this writing is to straw man the opposition, to sketch out the opposition in some of the least logically consistent or capable or justifiable or coherent ways possible, and then destroy the straw man that he's erected. In fact, if we look at this section from London, the entire engagement with the Colonel is the only refutation that is actually addressed, despite there apparently being multiple people to assert and question and challenge him in this engagement. The final conclusion of it is when Wixon stands up and starts telling him, "Okay, we'll meet you in kind."
which justifies his position of the revolution. Like, we must have the revolution, because otherwise they will have a counter-revolution, and so we are justified in committing violence.
I'm going to tell you that we're going to get violent, so that you tell me that you're going to get violent back, so that I can justify me by being violent.
Yes.
Well, that's a BLM. That's
well, yeah.
Black Lives Matter.
Yes.
And next week we'll talk about the Black Hundreds and how it's got nothing to do with anything that's happening.
Let's wrap up. It's just
if we're gonna wrap up, we really ought to read Wixon's response.
Yeah.
Who wants to handle that?
Where's Wixon's response? Where is it?
The next page.
Yeah, I think it's the next one.
Right here. Right before the beginning.
Well,
no answer is necessary. Page before that.
Is it? I thought. Oh, sorry. It's because my click doesn't seem. There we are. Yeah. So Wixon slaps down everyone else involved in the conversation, saying no answer is necessary. I followed the whole discussion with amazement and disgust. I'm disgusted with you, gentlemen, members of my class. You have behaved like foolish little schoolboys. What will intruding ethics and the thunder of the common politician into such a discussion? You've been out-generaled and outclassed. You've been very wordy, and all you have done is buzz. You have buzzed like gnats about a bear. Gentlemen, there stands the bear, which I think this little section, I think is pretty base. Believe me, the situation is serious. That bear reached out his paws tonight to crush us. He said there are 1.5 million revolutionists in the United States. That is a fact. He has said that this is their intention, to take away from us our governments, our palaces, all of our purpleys. Sorry, is that right?
Yep.
I like that expression.
I just got thrown off by that. I didn't remember that being part of it. That also is a fact. A great change is coming in society. But happily, It may not be the change the bear anticipates. The bear has said that he will crush us. What if we crush the bear? Which is a completely fair retort.
Mm-hmm.
There's a giant bear on the loose that wants to crush you.
I do like the euphemism being a bear, considering obviously
Soviets.
Yeah, seems quite fitting. But yeah, he's just been challenged by this person that said that there's 1.5 million people ready to gun them down. I mean, use lead. I don't remember what euphemism he uses exactly, but essentially gun them down and steal their property. And his answer is, well, okay, we'll meet the challenge. And it's framed in a way that we're meant to be horrified by this response.
Can you believe this?
We will hunt the bear. We will not reply to the bear in words. Our reply shall be couched in terms of lead. We are in power. Nobody will deny it. By virtue of that power, we shall remain in power. This, then, is our answer. We have no words to waste on you. When you reach out your vaunted strong hands for our palaces and purpled ease, we will show you what strength is. In roar of shell and shrapnel and in whine of machine guns will our answer be couched. We will grind you revolutionists down under our heel, and we shall walk upon your faces. The world is ours, we are its lords, and our lords it shall remain. As for the host of labor, it has been in the dirt since history began, and I read history aright. And in the dirt it shall remain so long as I and mine and those that come after us have the power. There is the word, it is the king of words, power. Not God, not mammon, but power. Pour it over your tongue till it tingles with it. Power. I am answered, Ernest said quietly. It is the only answer that could be given. Power.
Yeah. And so when a common criticism of Marxist thought is that all it is there are no ethics involved. All it is a conflict for power. Jack London is saying, yeah, what of it? Power politique in some ways is accurate. It kind of goes onto a Machiavellian way of thinking, which shows how everything else is rhetoric again, because he's trying to label people as being unprincipled and have all they care about is materialism. But this is maybe the only true insight into Ernest that we see. Power. That's what we want.
And that leads to my absolute favorite quote.
They always claim that they just want this power to achieve these very wonderful ends, but their ends don't sound that appealing to me.
Yeah.
What was the quote, sorry?
Oh, well, my absolute favorite quote is Heinlein's quote on power. When you vote, you are exercising force, and force, my friends, is violence, the ultimate authority from which all other authority is derived.
Yeah.
He's not wrong.
No.
But that doesn't give it moral authority. That doesn't give it moral authority, just practical authority.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so ended the night with the Philomats.
Yeah, and so ended the night with the Magnum Opi.
Magnum Opi.
Yeah, I think it's a good time to cut it off, because this will be a juicy section to go straight into next Sunday. I think it's been a fun, different way of analyzing the text, and I hope that people watching understand why I decided to go for it, just purely based on the text itself, because it's good to sometimes read people in their own words.
Yeah, true, and these characters maybe they don't necessarily merit a huge discussion, because we're not supposed to. They're just all they are is projecting certain ideas. So. Yeah,
well, this is the thing. I found it impossible to analyze as a piece of fiction, because all it is a soapbox. So if that's how it's going to be written, that's how we'll judge it. You can't really comment on the characters or anything else involved in the plot, because none of it all feels so fake and just a setup, as I said, to push forward a certain narrative. So I thought this is the only real way to address that.
Yeah, you're taking it at its word.
Yeah.
I'm giving it a damn good debunking.
Giving it a thrashing. Yeah, Jack London debunked. That's what I'll change the title.
Yeah.
Facts and logic.
Debunked.
You won't believe number 10.
Yeah.
Right. Well, on that note, we'll be coming back next Sunday to take another look. And like I say, I imagine it's going to be 3 parts. I think on this PDF it's 200 pages, which we're on 70 now. So I think, split quite evenly between the 3 sections. Tomorrow, join us for a complete opposite end of the spectrum. We'll be reviewing, analysing an interview with Ayn Rand. That's going to be at 8 o'clock tomorrow. But any final thoughts from anyone else?
Why?
Power corrupts.
Why are we doing this? Why are we here?
Next book, we'll be looking at the Communist Manifesto. I'm just trying to drive everyone to the point of insanity.
So that we'll actually understand it and believe it.
Very well, comrade.
Good night.
Yeah, thank you, everyone, and goodbye.
Tonight.
Bye.
Bye-bye.